We've all heard the same basic tale about how money came to be. Picture this. Way back in ancient times, people were stuck with this awkward trading system. Imagine a farmer sitting on piles of grain but desperately needing new shoes. Meanwhile, a shoemaker's got plenty of footwear but is craving some fresh meat. Trading directly was messy, frustrating, and just plain complicated. Then one day, somebody came up with a genius solution. Currency. Suddenly, coins showed up, trading got smoother, and human society took a giant leap forward. It's a neat little story. Makes perfect sense, sounds reassuring, and here's the kicker, it's almost entirely false. Money wasn't created because swapping goods was annoying. It was created because those in power needed a mechanism, and once they built that mechanism, it permanently transformed who got to control wealth, work, and even warfare. This is the economic storyteller, where currency, authority, and the past intersect. And nothing ever turns out to be as straightforward as the textbooks claim. Here's what actually happened before money existed. Most human groups did unspend their days bartering at all. Within tight-knit communities, people weren't constantly haggling over trades. Instead, they depended on remembering favors, owing each other, and mutual trust. You helped others because you were part of the group. You got help because everyone knew who you were. Nobody kept written records of who owed what. Everything lived in people's memories. Worth wasn't some abstract concept. It was woven into relationships. This system functioned incredibly well, but only when communities stayed small. However, size transforms everything. When populations exploded, tiny villages evolved into sprawling cities. Commerce reached beyond relatives and familiar faces. Outsiders showed up bringing different ways of life and zero shared background, and they brought along a fresh challenge. Trust couldn't expand indefinitely, memory became unreliable. Mutual obligations started fading away. Conflict became more common. And leaders confronted an issue that simple bartering could never fix. How do you supply food to an army filled with strangers? How do you collect taxes from people you'll encounter just once? How do you pull resources from citizens scattered across enormous territories? This is the moment money enters our story. Not as something convenient, but as essential infrastructure. For wealth to travel long distances, it required a physical form. Something that lasted, could be carried easily, and could be split into portions. Something you could count without endless discussions and rely on without personal history. Grain would rot. Animals could escape. Property stayed put. Human effort disappeared the instant it was finished. Metal became the answer. Copper, bronze, and silver. These weren't picked because they looked attractive. They were selected because they performed reliably under challenging conditions. They didn't decay. You could melt them down and reshape them however needed. They could be measured out in exact quantities. And crucially, they were rare enough to hold value, yet abundant enough to pass from hand to hand. Metal didn't just preserve worth. It made worth transportable. But merchants weren't the ones who transformed metal into currency. Rulers were. Ancient governments in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and around the Mediterranean didn't require money for trading amongst themselves. They required money for giving orders. Armies won't fight for empty promises. Soldiers won't keep marching on kind words alone. They require payment. And that payment has to be uniform, instantly identifiable, and backed by force. Metal delivered exactly that. The moment governments demanded taxes paid in metal, everything shifted dramatically. People who previously lived mostly outside market systems got dragged into them. Simply surviving became an obligation. Crops transformed into debts. To obtain metal, peasants had to sell their produce, their physical work, or their hours. Markets didn't just naturally appear. They were forced into being through taxation and authority. Money didn't liberate people from their rulers. It made those rulers incredibly more effective. This is the chapter of money's history that textbooks conveniently skip over. Money wasn't impartial. It wasn't invented to help equal trading partners exchange goods smoothly. It was engineered to measure, take, and redistribute wealth on a massive scale. And once wealth could be taken, it could be saved. Once it could be saved, it could be hoarded. And once it could be hoarded, it could be converted into military might. That's exactly why the first financial hubs weren't busy marketplaces. They were religious temples and royal palaces. Religious leaders and monarchs were tracking grain, precious metals, and human labor long before independent merchants traded freely. Record-keeping existed before actual coins did. Written accounts appeared before open markets. The entire structure was constructed from those in power downward, not from ordinary people upward. Then came another revolutionary shift. Metal worked well enough, but stamped metal changed everything. When early governments started producing coins, imprinting metal pieces with official markings, specific weights, and governmental backing, they weren't simply making trade uniform. They were literally stamping trust onto metal. A coin communicated something profound. You don't have to trust the individual giving you this coin. You just have to trust whoever stamped their seal on it. Official authority took the place of personal relationships. In ancient Lydia, across Greek city-states, and eventually throughout Rome, coins displayed faces, religious figures, and symbols of dominance. They weren't merely economic instruments. They were propaganda in your pocket. Every single transaction reinforced who held power. Every purchase reminded people which system controlled their lives. And once rulers grasped this, temptation arrived quickly. When you control the money supply, you control how much of it exists. You control what it's made of. You control who gets it and when. Early rulers discovered they could extend their budgets by reducing the metal content, shaving coin edges, or printing more coins than their reserves actually supported. Government spending became simpler. The consequences showed up much later. Inflation wasn't some modern discovery. It was born the very second money became something rulers could manipulate. Prices climbed higher. Public trust weakened. Military forces demanded increased wages. Markets found ways to adjust, yet somehow the system survived. Why? Because once money existed, turning back became impossible. The tool proved too valuable, too effective, too deeply woven into how wealth circulated, and here's the crucial insight. Money didn't develop separately from power. It developed alongside it, hand in hand. Those ancient bronze coins from fallen empires might be museum pieces now, but the principles they established never disappeared. We still use standardized measurements. We still depend on authorities to determine what has value. We still accept abstract symbols instead of personal trust. We still operate within systems engineered to transfer wealth efficiently. Upward to the powerful, outward across distances, and forward through time. The materials evolved. The underlying motivation stayed identical. Once metal became currency, human societies crossed a threshold with no way back. Because money didn't simply measure what things were worth, it restructured human behavior. When worth could be preserved in metal, power no longer required constant threats and force. It could accumulate silently, steadily. Military forces could be assembled before conflicts even started. Government bureaucracies could expand during peaceful times. Nations no longer needed to grab everything immediately. They could spread their control across years and decades. Money gave authority the gift of patience, and patience represents a formidable kind of power. This explains why monetary systems typically outlive individual rulers. Kings get overthrown, entire dynasties crumble, national boundaries get redrawn, yet the fundamental logic of money persists, quietly adapting to new symbols and new leaders while maintaining the identical structure beneath the surface. Coins once featured religious deities. Then came emperors and conquerors. Eventually, national symbols and monuments. The pictures changed constantly, but the core message remained unchanged. Wealth moves through channels controlled by authority. As economies grew larger, metal-based money expanded way beyond what it was originally designed for. What started as a mechanism to pay fighting forces and gather taxes became the foundation of commerce, lending, and social ranking. Riches could now pile up across multiple lifetimes. Debts could be documented and legally enforced. Financial obligations could be sold or transferred. And inequality could perpetuate itself long after whatever initially caused it had vanished. This is when money stopped being simply a tool and became the air we breathe. By the time massive empires like Rome hit their peak, money saturated everything. Markets flourished everywhere. Trading routes connected entire continents. Coins changed hands countless times, carrying zero information about who originally mined that metal, who got taxed to dig it up, or who suffered when rulers messed with its worth. The abstract nature did exactly what it was designed to do. The whole system started feeling normal, unseen, unavoidable. And when problems arose, people rarely questioned the system's foundation. Rulers diluted coin purity not from stupidity, but because they faced impossible choices. Military campaigns drained treasuries. Government operations required constant funding. Increasing taxes directly could trigger uprisings. So value got quietly watered down. A bit less silver mixed in here, a few more coins issued there. The impact wasn't instant. Prices rose gradually. Confidence eroded bit by bit. By the time ordinary people noticed the damage, the decision-makers had usually moved on or died. Nothing screams sustainable system quite like fixing today's emergencies by stealing from tomorrow. Ring any bells? Today's money doesn't clink in your pocket anymore, but it still carries the genetic code of bronze and silver. Modern currencies aren't secured by precious metals, yet they're secured by governmental authority, legal obligations, and the threat of force. Taxes still come due. Outstanding debts still demand payment. Military forces still need funding. Scarcity still gets managed not by natural limits but through deliberate policy decisions. The terminology has gotten fancier and more technical. Rather than coin debasement, officials discuss monetary liquidity. Rather than physically clipping coins, they talk about central bank balance sheets. Rather than all-powerful emperors, we've got semi-independent institutions. Yet the fundamental machinery remains identical. Money still gets designed to efficiently transfer wealth through systems built around concentrated power. This doesn't mean modern finance is inherently wicked. It means it's inherently human. It developed to work at massive scale. Fairness has consistently been an afterthought. Something fought over, demanded, and occasionally won through political struggle and public pressure. But money's fundamental architecture has always benefited whoever controls the printing press, writes the regulations, and commands the enforcement. That's not some shadowy conspiracy. It's simply documented history. Grasping this reality transforms how you interpret inflation, debt problems, and economic meltdowns. These aren't glitches in an otherwise flawless machine. They're built-in features of a structure designed to manage enormous populations, massive debts, and vast power disparities. When pressure builds up, the system flexes and adapts. Sometimes it flexes quietly and gradually. Sometimes it shatters explosively and visibly, but it never bends in random ways. This explains why financial literacy rooted in economic history actually matters. Not because it lets you predict the next market crash, but because it reveals the boundaries of the system you're living within. It shows you where the real incentives hide, who profits from keeping things stable, who gets hurt when things get volatile, and why the same supposed solutions keep getting recycled under fresh branding. Genuine financial independence doesn't come from rejecting money entirely or daydreaming about its elimination. It comes from comprehending what money was originally built to accomplish and what it was never designed to deliver. Money can transfer value between people. It can preserve the fruits of labor across time. It can help coordinate incredibly complex systems. But it cannot substitute for sound judgment. It cannot ensure equal outcomes or fair treatment. And it cannot protect people who confuse the